you, because it's always really beneficial to me. And if it's beneficial to me, I think it might be beneficial to a lot of other people. Would you mind, could we start with like a literally like 3 minute meditation or 5 minute meditation or something like that? Because
Mm.
I think, I mean, you are a meditation teacher. This is something that we are for sure going to talk about, but I also think that, I don't know, a lot of people, and including myself, somebody that's experimented with meditation quite a bit, it, you use certain apps and you kind of experience this kind of what I think is probably like a watered down version of meditation. I think a lot of people are like, okay, I just focus on like the breath and that's meditation. I think what you provide, or what you have provided, the kind of commentary has been really valuable and has kind of shown me a different side of meditation. So I think, first of all, meditate a very short kind of mind and heart primer before the podcast starts would be valuable. But I also think it'd be great for people to kind of just see like this is also kind of what meditation looks like, and this is what it can be.
Yeah, great.
That's where we go.
So, yeah, let's get into it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I invite us to take in our environment as a first step. Just realize where we are and find anything familiar around us that feels reassuring. Just take that in and see how the body responds to the familiarity around us. And if it feels okay, we can close our eyes and take a couple of deep breaths in and out of the belly. And starting by letting go of the idea that there is something to do, something to control and manage. Noticing that the mind is drawn to all kinds of problems and things that need to be done, drawn towards the future and the past. And as we exhale, just opting out of that. And feeling the weight of the body. Allowing the weight of the body to come down towards the buttocks and the thighs and the feet. And as we feel just how heavy the body is, it becomes apparent that the ground is holding us. And just notice how you don't have to do anything at all to be held. It's just happening. And notice how stable, how solid, how reliable, how safe the ground is. And as we feel the stability of the ground, we can become like mountains, really connected to the earth and observing the phenomena around us. Just like a mountain observes the weather. And from that place of stability and equanimity, we're not getting drawn into the phenomena that we're observing in the body and in the mind. We'll just add one more quality, and that is the heart. So I invite us to allow our attention to drop down from the head to the heart. And imagining a beloved being for whom we have uncomplicated feelings of love right in front of us. And imagining holding this being and just feeling what it's like in the body when we really care about somebody, when we really want all the best in the world for them. What happens in the chest and in the arms as we imagine holding them? And so, as you and I speak, Jack, and as your listeners tune in, the invitation is to keep track of these two qualities of the ground, equanimity, and the heart. What it's like to feel our way lovingly through our experience rather than thinking about it and analyzing it only. Thank you.
Thank you. Always great. Always amazing. Alrighty.
I'm so happy that it resonates, Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now I think we can get into things, and I think we're going to come back to this. I think this is something that meditation, mindfulness is going to be a big part of this conversation. But I think the way that I would probably want to set this up is, what I know about you is you were studying and working in essentially international affairs. You speak a bunch
Correct.
of different languages. You come from Europe, but your family is from multiple places. You went to school in Israel, in the United States. You worked for the UN. So I'd love to maybe tell me a little bit about that, and then. But now you're not working for the UN. You're not
Nope.
exactly involved in international relations per se. Maybe first tell everybody. I don't know how. I guess you kind of identify yourself professionally, but also what what it is that you're involved in, that you're passionate about, and then kind of. I guess I want to start with that. Then you were involved in international affairs and all that stuff, and I'm curious what changed. Curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was born in Milan, in Italy, born and raised there. My mother is from a Syrian Lebanese Jewish family. My dad is Italian, not Jewish. And his family has quite a bit of anti-Semitism that it carries, and that is relevant, and you'll see why in a moment. I ended up moving to Israel, looking for a place where I could really be myself, really be unapologetically Jewish, really be unapologetically gay. I found that place in Tel Aviv. I studied in Herzliya, just north of Tel Aviv, for my BA, and I studied government strategy, that kind of thing, and it was an incredible time, very formative, very impactful. I studied at Georgetown, again, international affairs in DC, and ended up working for the mission of Israel to the United Nations in New York City. And what that was, in a way, was me transmuting some of the trauma around, anti-Semitism growing up in Italy into something constructive and into something that I thought could make a difference. Turns out that I'm not a very good diplomat. I'm not very good at working in big organizations and all kinds of other things. But mostly, I want to spend my days in ways that allow me to feel that I'm making a difference immediately. And so at some point while I was working at the UN, my body started betraying me. So it felt. In truth, it was pointing me to something very important that needed to happen in terms of my own healing. And I found myself unable to do more and more really basic things. At first, I had a hard time sitting at a desk and looking at a screen because I felt that my face, my eyes, my jaw, my neck would contort into these incredibly painful spasms. And nobody was really helping me understand what was happening. And little by little, it expanded to more and more activities until at a certain point, years later, I had a hard time speaking, chewing, and walking. And this was dystonia, is the label for part of this in Western medicine, a neurological condition that uh, affects the communication of the brain with the muscles. And it's basically a form of maladaptive neuroplasticity, right? Where my brain had learned dysfunctional patterns because of all kinds of traumas that I had been through. And so, that was the beginning of a transformation. And it was really my body, so it felt, telling me enough of this suppression, enough suppressing your feelings, your emotions, and your authenticity in order to chase some kind of self-esteem, right? That is really superficial, that is based on accomplishments um, and how you can look good, according to the standards that you've been taught. It felt that there was something. It felt like there was something much more fundamental that wanted to emerge. And so, over the course of several years, I spent months at a time in bed. I had to quit that job. I I pursued other professional endeavors, but entrepreneurship of various kinds. But at a certain point, I spent months at a time just watching my thoughts because I couldn't even focus my eyes on a screen or on a book. And that was a sort of forced spiritual retreat that forced me to surrender to what was happening and learn from it instead of trying to overpower it.
Yeah.
And it taught me to open my heart. It taught me to attune to my body and my emotions and to see that my body, my emotions, my thoughts, they're all constructed, right? And if I know how to construct different patterns, I can regain my health, right? I can learn to think differently in ways that stress me out less. I can learn to activate parts of my body that I have learned to forget. Um, it can all be built, and it starts with awareness, and it starts with the heart. And so that's what I do now. I help others who suffer with all kinds of health issues, but mostly neurological issues and dystonia, do what I did, which is start a process of adaptive neuroplasticity that allows them to slowly get their lives back. And I teach meditation. I was trained and continue to be trained in different traditions, from Vipassana based meditation to currently more Indo-Tibetan Mahamudra. And I'm passionate about helping us all awaken. And you were mentioning earlier what one can get from the apps in terms of meditation, and often the objective there is something that is still rooted in a materialist paradigm, right? That says we're trying to get material benefits in terms of productivity, in terms of relaxation, in terms of, right, from meditation. And that's all good. And it's true that meditation can do all those things. But really, the promise of spiritual practice is to help us understand the nature of reality and live lives that are more aligned with the way things really are, so that we can see clearly, so that we can be more happy, so we can suffer less, and so we can contribute to the world in ways that only we can. And so I'm passionate about helping us all make our way there, and I'm making my way there myself.
Amazing. Amazing. And you set it up really well. I want to go back though, to touch on dystonia a little bit more because it's it's not something that I had heard of before I met you, and I do find it really interesting and want to learn a little bit more about that experience and also kind of how you came out of it. So when you first started, like, what were like the symptoms that you first started to experience, and what was like the kind of timeline of this? Did this happen over? You mentioned like a couple of years. Did this happen over? Like, how long have you been? I guess were you dealing with this in the most kind of intense phases of it? And I'm also curious, like, what were you telling yourself, or what were you experiencing psychologically when you started to experience the kind of horror of this sickness or neurological disorder?
Yeah. So one day I was in Israel and I was working at a think tank, and I heard the alarm clock on my phone, and I tried to turn around to turn it off. And I was in bed and I physically couldn't turn, right? My body wouldn't move. It was so rigid and in so much pain that, that I physically couldn't reach the phone. And so it took me a really long time to call for help, and it all, worked out. But basically, that was kind of when things exploded.
Mm,
And that was 2011. The roots of this are older,
mm,
and they have to do with a variety of factors, developmental trauma, um, you know, toxicity that I was exposed to, and that we're all exposed to. But mostly when I was 9, 10, 11 years old, there were some dental interventions that were done to me that were completely wrong, based on wrong paradigms, and they ended up opening up my occlusion, my bite on the left side of my mouth. And so my brain is wired a bit different, right? And it has a propensity for neuroplasticity. And that is the case for a lot of people with dystonia. And so it adapted to this situation really quickly and started shedding the connections that it didn't need. And so it said, oh, okay, you're not chewing on the left side. I guess I don't have to use the left side for that. I guess I don't have to use the left side for speaking. I guess, when you're making an effort and you're biting down on your teeth, you're not really using the left side. So I'm going to forget that as well. And little by little, one thing led to the other, and a series of compensations um, started kind of snowballing, until at a certain point, I had the entire right side of my body that was being overused and was caught in a terribly painful spasm. And then the left side was kind of droopy and forgotten, and more difficult to access. And so, that's my version of dystonia. That's what I experienced, but different people experience wildly different symptoms.
Hmm. And so as this is happening to you, I mean, obviously there's
Yeah.
this oh shit moment where you realize something is terribly wrong. Over the course of what I would amount to, weeks and months, you probably tried to see doctors. Did anybody have
Yeah.
an indication of what was going on, or
Yeah.
or yeah.
So, it's really frustrating with dystonia, because it's it's the perfect disorder to challenge the materialist mindset and paradigm that we're in, right? Because it lies at the intersection of psychology and neurology and, anatomy and dentistry. And the way we inhabit our bodies, the way we um, right relate to our own experience, has a very physical, material impact on how our bodies function and develop, right? And so the thing that I was being told at the time was that I needed to undergo double jaw surgery, right? To have my face broken up and filled with titanium and all kinds of things. And they said, we don't know if that's going to help you or not, but you need to do it. And somehow I got convinced that that I had to do that. I started the preparations, and my symptoms just became worse and worse and worse. And so it was, and again, they were getting worse because the paradigm that this was based in was just completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but basically, it was an experience of loneliness, of being misunderstood, and of knowing deep inside, without being able to explain it, that this was about a mismatch about how I perceived my body and how I was able to use my body. The model internally that I had of myself was just wrong. And so, yeah, I went from doctor to doctor, not getting many answers. And I'll add, I was looking around and seeing my friends who, were in their 20s and 30s and were able to live their lives and, get married and advance their careers and so on. And I was really resentful and angry and depressed. And, and at a certain point, it all came to a boiling point where I said, I have to stop resisting this. I have to stop pretending that it's not happening. I need to start finding my own answers, and that's how things began evolving. Yeah,
Wow. Okay. And what I mean, let's maybe just go to like the darkest part of it, if that's okay with you. Like,
yeah,
uh, what were you? Yeah, I don't know. What kind of feelings were you feeling when you at the most intense point of this, and maybe how many? I don't know if we like think about like the timeline of all this from like kind of the alarm clock situation to you kind of
yeah.
feeling like you're helping yourself and getting yourself out of this.
Right.
Where does maybe that, the boiling point, where does
Yeah,
that exist inside here? And yeah, what were you feeling? How were you thinking about your
yeah,
your own life? How did things change? What were you thinking your future looked like?
yeah. So that timeline is probably around 12 years, and the worst
Wow.
of it was towards the end. Um,
Holy shit, man. Wow.
yeah, and it was a gradual kind of, um, you know, a gradual deterioration.
Mm,
Um, the way I described it at some point, and I read this kind of something similar online, but yeah, the way it came to me was, it's like everybody has a bunch of colors that they can use, and they get to wake up in the morning and paint a picture with many colors.
mm,
And little by little, you wake up in the morning and you have fewer and fewer colors to paint with. And that was really the experience, that by the end of this kind of 12-year period, I could basically barely draw anything, right? I could do very little with my days. And so that was particularly hard for me because I had based my entire sense of self-esteem, because of how I was brought up, um, on my ability to accomplish things and to succeed and to be productive and to prove something about myself. And that was taken away from me, right? And for good reason, right? Because I had to discover that there is something intrinsic about us that is valuable and worthy. And, if we want to express this in theistic terms, and we don't have to, but it works well here. Um, if I was born completely disabled, God would love me no less, right? And so that became really the the challenge, that self-compassion. But before I understood what self-compassion was, and self-love, and kind of connecting to the love that is always loving us, I was in a very dark place, because I thought that because I wasn't producing and because I wasn't functioning the way I was told I was supposed to, I thought that this meant that I had no right to live, right? I thought that I was a waste of space.
mm,
And so, I've had suicidal periods. I've never acted on it, but I've thought about it. And I'm giving you the kind of the cleaned up version, right? But there's so much more drama that happened over the course of those 12 years, including an abusive relationship with, with sexual violence and psychological abuse, and all of this, you know, while living in the U.S. before um, my job at the UN, without a long-term visa, without a work authorization, without the ability to really provide for myself, living with this very difficult man. um, and so it was really an experience of having all my certainties and every aspect of the of safety and security that I had known taken away,
Mm.
and it forced me to find the the kind of safety and security that is not always present, but I know is there. um, it's not always accessible, let's say, but I know it's there. That is much more fundamental,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
I
those are
resonate
some of
with
the
that a lot.
lessons. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredibly intense. I mean, this is one of the things that, and I would not say that my experience is as dramatic and long term as yours, but we do share this in the sense that I also had a few years ago. I had like a very dramatic and kind of all of a sudden health scare where I was pretty much bedridden for close to a year, and I experienced in a very short and intense condensed time. I experienced something very similar. I would before I really knew what was going on. There's a point of 3 to 4 or 5 months where there was just a lot of confusion. There was we don't know what's going on. The doctors don't know what's going on. We're going to take some tests, but there's no real certainty. Is this, you know, what is this? Is my immune system failing me? Is this like Lyme disease? Is this cancer? I have no idea. No idea what's going on. Um, I would have this reoccurring thing. This happened for like 3 months. Every single night. Every single night, I'm at my parents' place, uh, in bed. Trying to go to bed, and my brain would just become hyperactive, and it's like it was like a flock of like crows or something, like attacking bread or something, like all of these really really intense terrible thoughts that are basically just it's like hyper anxiety, thinking about all the worst case scenarios. Is this it? Is this what the rest of my life is like? What does that make? What does that make me then? It makes me essentially kind of like disabled, which doesn't feel very good. Um, uh, your heart starts to beat faster. There's a kind of sensation where you're fighting everything. This isn't what's going to happen. And then this would happen literally every single night. And then this overwhelming, this like wave, almost like a blanket of empathy and gratitude would come over me. And it was the weirdest. This would happen every single night. It would, and I would say, you know what? Everything I know about my life up to this point doesn't really matter because I am alive. And the gift of being alive is so great and so beautiful that like I don't care if I have this health ailment or disability, or if my life disappears before me. Like if I maybe I don't have a lot of time left, but like I felt this overwhelming kind of sinking into myself, and the resolve, the basically conclusion was like gratefulness for life. And for me, that is what kind of started my interest in kind of the more emotional, spiritual, brain world. Like that's what has interested me. And I think the feeling that I had is I kind of felt like I was living my life up to that point essentially like living up to the expectations of other people. You're supposed to accomplish, you're supposed to achieve, you're supposed to get a good job. And what it felt like to me to kind of, I liked your paintbrush analogy. What it felt like to me was it was if I basically kind of fell into water with goggles on and realized that there is a lot more. There is a different world. There's another world that I can explore, and it's so much more like the world became infinitely larger, infinitely more interesting, and infinitely more kind of rich. Like life now is this just continual kind of discovery process where everything is feeding into everything. I'm always learning about myself. I'm always learning about others, like which became a very beautiful thing. And I'm not sure if you feel this way. I would be curious to hear, but I don't. On one hand, the sickness was really fucked up and terrible, and like I don't wish that on other people, but I can speak for myself that it was also a gift. Like it was a really really terrible experience, but it also opened my eyes up to, I would say, there was an awakening. There was an awakening to life, and a life that I didn't really know existed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm incredibly like and forever kind of grateful to. I'm curious if you kind of felt something similar, and maybe if you could describe kind of the 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 transformation that kind of started, because you you were dealing with this, and at a certain point you started to, it sounds like, just do your own research. You started to kind of heal yourself. I'd love to hear a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more about that process, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about how kind of that process of self-discovery and healing turned into kind of what you do now. What was the kind of
Mm-hmm.
behind, oh, you know what, I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to become a healer essentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if you've ever heard the term shamanic illness, but it really resonates for me. It's anchored in the idea that life happens for us, not to us.
Mm,
And in different cultures, there were traditionally individuals that would have these mysterious illnesses and weren't able to participate in the life of the tribe or what have you. And it was because they were called to connect with deeper aspects of reality. And
mm,
what you're describing, it sounds like, is a calling, an awakening to, first of all, connect with your interiors,
mm,
right? And the interior aspect of our experience. We were talking about materialism in um, our previous exchange, and we we are steeped in this paradigm that says that the only thing that exists is what is visible and measurable outside of ourselves. And sometimes it takes something tough to shake us out of that and um, and lead us to this other half of of experience, right? To the other half of reality, right? What is within and not just what is outside. And so I always had a very rich kind of inner world, inner landscape, but I was taught that it was to be suppressed and that I had to look away and that I had to um, just function in the world in a way that looked normal and looked, you know, um, acceptable and would conform to expectations. And so with my illness, I was forced in a way to step into my strengths, which are really related to this inner landscape, right? Um, and so, you know, there are different ways of knowing, right? We can know something because we learn it from a book, we learn it from a teacher, we learn it from the outside. But there's also a knowing that is internal. And there is something that my teacher, John Churchill, calls, let's see if I can get this right, valid yogic non-conceptual cognition. Okay. So uh, basically, downloads, right? Basically, connecting with something larger,
mm,
right? That shows us the way. And yes, I read some books and yes, I had some teachers, but the things that I managed to understand about the body and about the flow of energy in the body and how our awareness can govern the flow of energy in the body and how anatomy perpetuates um, patterns of flow of energy in the body, how our trauma, right, the trauma that we carry within psychologically fragments our nervous system in a way that is reflected physically in our flesh, right? Um, that full picture really came to me by looking within, by investigating my inner experience, and by extension, by connecting with the broader field of consciousness that we share. And I know this might sound really woo-woo to some, and you don't have to buy into the metaphysical kind of aspects of this. The basic idea is that there's, as you were saying, a whole universe to discover within, and it can be hard when it emerges all at once, right? When things kind of start bubbling up from below the line of conscious awareness, because they want to be processed and want to be felt and want to be loved. That process can be tough, but it's an incredible gift, and it's the only way to really grow into who we are meant to be, right? It's the only path to true individuation, for our soul to really be more and more in the driver's seat. And so, I say this to clients often, and initially they get mad at me, but then they come around and they say, oh, you know what, you were right. um, this is a gift if you choose to look at it as such. If you ask yourself, how can I grow from this,
Yeah.
as opposed to, why is this happening to me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I during this time, I was also, using a lot of reading a lot and listening to a lot of podcasts to kind of, I don't know, find some sort of meaning in all of this. And I forget exactly who said it, but some person said something like, every obstacle is an opportunity for you to grow and become a better version of yourself. And that has stuck with me. Like literally everything. I mean, you can use that mindset for everything. Every single hardship you experience is an opportunity for you to grow. How are you going to are you going to become a more empathetic, compassionate, emotionally intelligent, person when you're fighting with somebody or something like that, having an argument? Like you can have this argument and you can be better, or you can consciously think about it and try to use it as essentially like uh, a way to like build yourself. Um, everything uh, everything can grow from you can grow from hardship, and yeah, that I definitely empathize and experience that a lot. I would say I would like to hear a bit about the kind of to get a little concrete for a sec, like how do you now that you have clients, how exactly do you go about treating dystonia? I saw on your website that you something called maps. Maybe you could, I don't know exactly how
Mm-hmm.
integral to the treatment that you practice, how integral that is,
Mm-hmm.
how integral maps is, but maybe you could tell me a little bit about how your practice and how you're helping
Yeah.
clients, and yeah, how you've learned to essentially help people with dystonia.
Yeah. So I don't refer to this as a treatment, because really I'm not doing anything to others, right?
Mm,
I'm empowering uh, individuals to realize cause and effect, essentially, right? And realize that with mindfulness, they can reconnect with their bodies, that with self compassion, they can relate to their experience in a way that promotes regulation rather than get themselves more worked up. And yeah, you saw kind of that page about MAPS, which is an acronym that I used in the beginning, about mindfulness, awakening, hypotonic pathways, right? The sleepy parts within us, neuroplasticity, and self compassion. Really, this model has evolved into an 8-pronged system
mm,
that, starts with helping clients understand what patterns they have learned, right, in terms of how they use their bodies, and particularly looking at their cranial nerves, what they can feel into and what they cannot, what is overused, what is underused.
Mm.
Not because I'm trying to diagnose something, but because I want them to have firsthand felt sense awareness of what they're doing, because that's a first step to then begin to be able to create change. And this is about beginning to understand that these patterns are constructed, right? And with our awareness, we construct our reality. We can be the creators of our own bodies. And then there's learning to regulate the nervous system in different ways. There's learning to engage those sleepy parts in new patterns so that we can let go of the parts that are spasming, that we overuse. There's learning about how to relate to the wounds psychologically that we carry within, and particularly looking at attachment, right? The process that really shapes our nervous system based on our interactions with our primary caretakers, and how we can use our imagination and how we can use collaboration with peers, with teachers, with therapists, and so on, how we can use mindfulness and meditation and so on to create new patterns, right?
Mm.
To work on our self-esteem, to work on our sense of self-worth, create patterns within ourselves that allow us to live life in a way that is resilient and that allows us to stay within our window of regulation, right? And then there's more. There's, gentle detoxification and hypernourishment with food, and there's using rhythm to synchronize the hemispheres, and there's working with dentists to kind of balance out the temporomandibular joints, and there's a lot in there. But it's basically about understanding, number one, that this is constructed and it's learned, and you can unlearn it, and it starts with you, and you have that power, right? You can do it. You are the creator of your life and your reality and your body, and that it has to be looked at from a holistic point of view, really looking at all the possible causal cofactors and tackling each one.
Amazing. Wow, it's yeah, super interesting. When did you actually start this? Like, when did you become like a practitioner of this? When did you take on clients? When did you decide, you know what, I'm actually going to I'm going to become somebody that is helping people with this? When did that happen? And what was the kind of thought process? Like, what I would love to hear kind of the conversation you had in your head when you were making that process, because
Mm,
it's very, it's very like dramatic and intense to, I don't know, like from a career perspective, you had this other life and you were
yeah.
dealing with other things, and you said, you know what? The experience, the sickness that I've been experiencing is like has been very meaningful and changed me in a way that I actually want to do. I want to actually want to help people. I'd
Hmm.
love to hear like, what was that conversation? What was that process
Mm,
like in your head when you kind of eventually started to make that decision?
yeah. Well, I'll tell you about two things in order to answer that question. The first one happened in New York City in the East Village at Guy Donahue's shala, where he taught Ashtanga yoga. And
Mhm.
I was practicing there, um, at 6 a.m. before going to work. And, anyone who has been to these shalas in New York City knows they're tiny and they're packed with people. My mat had neighboring mats on every corner touching it,
Oh
right?
God.
So, whenever I tried to extend my arms, I had to make sure I wasn't touching the person next to me.
Oh.
Um, and and so I decided one day not to rush to work, but instead to lie down in shavasana for a while. And I had a really powerful awakening experience where my sense of self and ego completely dropped,
Hmm.
and it dissolved, and I was one with everything. Right, I was one with the people in the shala. I was one with the city. I was one with the birds and the trees and the sun and all of reality. Right, and that was one of my first spiritual awakening experiences, and it really shook me, right? Because it told me that I am not who I think I am, right?
Yeah.
And I walk around with this kind of veil of delusion in front of my eyes, but that's not the truth of it. And I can now say that I didn't know it at the time, but I know now that I am neurodivergent, and I see it in a number of things. And by the way, the dystonia, the neuroplasticity, and so on, they're aspects of this. But part of this neurodivergence is that I do not want, and really suffer when I'm forced to, but I really don't want to conform to social expectations that don't make sense to me,
Yeah.
right?
100%.
It infuriates me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the UN, it does a few things that are helpful, but mostly it's an empty theater. And
Mm.
so was my work, at the ministry. Again, they do some great things, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel, but it's mostly theater. It's mostly about the appearance of looking like you're doing something. It's not about an actual product, right?
Mm.
And so that was very difficult for me. And so, to answer your question, in 2019, people started, just contacting me and asking me for advice on different things, um, and I could see that there was a lot of suffering out there, and that people were getting terrible advice, and a lot of people with dystonia, get surgeries that they don't need, and get all kinds of interventions done to them that worsen their state, right? More and more and more. And that infuriated me, right? Because I saw that these things were all based in the same faulty paradigms, chief among them the materialist paradigm that says that, um, I'm quoting Dr. Dan Siegel, a great pioneer in these things. He says, in medical school, we were taught that patients are bags of fluids with no locus of inner experience. Okay. That's exactly how people with dystonia are often looked at. And it's like, you're a black box. I don't care what's happening inside. I just see what it looks like, and I'm going to try to straighten you out from the outside,
Yeah.
not realizing that what's happening within is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that my path was to help others, and it was to point us to the aspects of this that are disregarded. And it aligns with, my broader kind of objective in life, my broader purpose, which is to help us awaken to that interconnection that I was mentioning, and to the nature of reality, and start acting accordingly.
Hmm. Wow. Hmm. Yeah, I think I want to linger on like the because you said it a few times, like awakening. I'd like to maybe touch on kind of the connection with mindfulness. You have in your background, you have what I see looks like a some sort of Buddha or some sort of Eastern spiritual figure,
Yeah.
possibly. I also see
Yeah.
some sort of
Mm.
path that I've seen before. You showed me this before. Um, uh, this looks like some spiritual stuff. I'd love for you to maybe tell me a little bit about um, I don't know what it mindfulness, meditation, Buddhism. Also, you and I have spoken about like the term like I think I'm pronouncing it right, bodhisattva, something like
Hmm.
this. You're engaged. You're engaged in a lot of different things, but maybe let's touch on kind of mindfulness and how this is. What is the connection between mindfulness, meditation, Buddhism, perhaps,
Hmm.
and awakening oneself? How do these topics, how do these processes, practices help people awaken? And is there a
Hmm.
I don't know if the goal is awaken. Maybe this is the wrong way to think about it, but like how can people awakening? What is awakening? It's a very kind
Hmm.
of large, broad topic, but I think it's an important one, and I have my own thoughts. But I'd love to hear. I know that was a very,
Yeah.
very kind of broad question, but I'd love for you just to like dive into it.
Yeah. So I'm obviously not giving an orthodox answer here. I'm giving kind of my answer.
Good. Yeah.
But, you know, the way I see it, we have been programmed by evolution to always look for problems because we are trying to survive. And we have been programmed by evolution to see ourselves as separate entities, when in reality,
Mm.
physics tells us that there is no real separation, right? And if you just really think about it, I can't exist without the water that I drink, and without the plants that I eat, and without the sunshine. And if you look at a really kind of deep level, these boundaries don't really hold up. So in a way, we have been programmed not to see reality as it really is, right? And that helps us survive. So knowing the truth and kind of feeling the truth all the time doesn't necessarily um, help us with what evolution wants us to do.
Mm.
I would argue that when we meditate, when we open our hearts, when we opt out of the constant chase for the things that give us pleasure, and we opt out of pushing away the things that cause us pain, we have an opportunity to come into our hearts, recognize the fundamentally loving quality of our awareness, right? That has room for everything. And we can begin to have the kind of stillness that allows us to see deeply into the way things really are. And I would argue that when we do see more and more deeply how things really are, we can actually step back into the game of, acting as a separate sense of self in the world from a place of greater awareness, of greater power, of a more open heart. And that is, in a way, the path of the bodhisattva, the awakening being that chooses to come back to, this realm, this realm of separation, right? Samsara, right? This dimension of reality in which we perceive ourselves to be separate, and in which we experience suffering and joy and pain and all these things. We choose to come back rather than just hang out in eternal bliss, in order to um, help others realize the same things, right? Realize that we are all waves of a same loving ocean, because we realize that we are not free until everybody's free, right? So this bodhisattva ideal is part of what I aspire to do, and how I aspire to live. Um, it's not something that I've read somewhere and decided, it was cool. It's something that really emerged from some of those experiences that I mentioned earlier from yoga as well. Um, a deep realization that, oh, things aren't the way they seem to be, and what does that mean for how I want to live my life? And so, does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah. No, you touched. That's actually a fantastic answer. Yeah. A lot of follow up questions. This is definitely a wormhole that we could get into as well. Just out of curiosity, I also see. So I see a few things on your in your background. I see
Yeah.
this Buddha looking individual. I see this kind of mountain path thing. Um,
Let's see
and then
if I
I
can.
yeah yeah
I
yeah
cannot really
yeah.
see. Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Can you
yeah,
see
that's
this?
beautiful. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Okay.
It's
Great.
gorgeous. And then I see to the outlined in red, I see some other thing, and then I see some Hebrew, and then I see a really trippy diagram that looks pretty cool too. Maybe I don't know. Just I'm just genuinely curious. Maybe oh nice, right on. See some yoga stuff.
There's a Buddha over there. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just because I'm interested, and I would just like to maybe. Can you just touch on each of the things that are on this wall and kind of their meaning to you?
Yeah. So the path that you saw earlier, maybe this one is worth just highlighting one more time. Um, this one
Yeah.
is a poster of the 9 stages of Maitreya, 9 stages of meditation of Mahamudra. And you see at the bottom, there is a monk that is being led by a monkey,
Mm.
an elephant that is
Yeah.
being led by a monkey, and there's a
Hmm.
monk behind that. And you see that as we go up the path, the elephant becomes whiter and whiter,
Hmm.
and the monkey uh, does not lead the elephant and the monk anymore. It's the monk that rides the elephant
Mm.
and uh, kind of reaches higher and higher states. So basically, this is a metaphor for the path of awakening
Mm.
and the path of enlightenment. And this was taught to me in its kind of fourth turning, modern, um, Western informed version by my teacher, John Churchill. And this is a life changing framework for meditation. Essentially, the elephant symbolizes the brain. If you look at it from behind and you see the brainstem, it kind of looks like an elephant. Um, the monkey is our monkey mind and the way kind of we are programmed by evolution and our instincts and all of it. And the monk is the meditator that is trying to do something, right? To find his bearings and not be led by the monkey. And so there are different stages along this path, different milestones that we can recognize, and those different milestones can help us orient, can help us understand different functions of our mind, the way different neurotransmitters impact how we're perceiving the world, and all kinds of really rich uh, kind of insights of that sort. And that is really the gift of the style of meditation that I learned from John, and that I continue to learn from him. It's a precise map of um, of that inner landscape, and uh, that is very rare, right? Uh, as you were saying earlier, for a lot of people, it's like, yeah, just focus on your breath and something will happen, right?
Yeah.
Um, and this style of meditation of pointing out instructions of, right, look at this, see that, um, is really impactful. So that's one thing. That's probably the main thing. You saw a Buddha on a little statue of Buddha on the other side. It's a reminder for me of, looking within and seeing that even when I get caught up in life, when I'm grabbing at experience, right, when I want things to be a certain way and not that way, when I'm getting caught up, that statue reminds me that I can let go of the grab, that things are actually open and workable. And,
Mm.
in Buddhism, we would say empty, right? They're not solid the way they seem to be. And this poster here is a poster of the main points of Lojong, which is this Tibetan tradition of mind training that I'm studying with John. And over here, there are a couple of things. There is the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is how um, Jewish mysticism looks at the way kind of the divine is manifested in the world, and something I'm still learning about. And this little uh, calligraphy here is really not very pretty in terms of the calligraphy, but it's a bunch of words and verses that I want to use to shape my reality, right?
Mm.
Um, so there's this idea in Judaism that words create reality, and
Mm.
it's really, really true in my experience. In the Bible, God creates the world by speaking it into existence,
Yeah.
but also, we have all kinds of practices like tefillin, right? We put these. I think in English they're called phylacteries with capsules of capsules that we put on two different acupuncture points. Actually, these capsules contain scrolls with verses from scripture, and the idea is that written words structure reality as well, right? And so it's a way of kind of infusing these things into ourselves. Or we have mezuzot, we have these rolls with again with verses that are affixed to our doors, and I want to use the same principle, right? And so when I see these verses, when I see these words, I am reminded of how I want to structure reality, right? How I want to co-create things. Yeah.
That's amazing.
How does that land? Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And just to make it a little bit more concrete, do you mind maybe just sharing one of these words or phrases that is on here and telling me a little bit about how, in the sense of structuring your reality, how it actually structures your reality?
Yeah. So one of the verses that I have on there is Gam ki elech begeitz al mavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Even if I shall walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me.
Mm.
It's a verse from the Psalms. I hope I'm not mistaken here. I'm pretty sure that's where it's from. But it's one that has always really resonated with me.
Mm.
I didn't really know why at first. And now that I've gone through all the Buddhist training and so on, and I've had successive, ever deepening experiences of awakening, right? I know that reality is non-dual, right? There isn't an inside and an outside. There isn't, um, you know, me inside and reality outside. It's one, right? And so once you are able to stabilize your view at that level of non-duality, right? Once you know that that is the truth of things, right? Because you are not who you think you are, right? So even when you don't exist as yourself, awareness is still aware, right? Once you know this, there is really nothing to fear, right? There's nothing at all to be afraid of. And, this verse says, even if I shall walk in the valley of the shadow of death, right? So you're walking in it, you're choosing to go through the scary stuff, and you know that God is with you. Or if I take it one step further, that you are um, a part of God, right? And so another one of the verses is Chelek Eloha mima'al. You are a part of God, of the good Lord above, right?
Mm.
Um, and so once you realize that this is the truth of things, you're able to go for your purpose, right? And different traditions have said this in different ways. In the Hindu tradition, in the Bhagavad Gita, there's the story of Arjun, who's asked to go into battle um, and is told, yeah, don't be afraid, this is your purpose, right? And again, there's no reason to be afraid, in a way, for the same reasons, right? So yeah, those are two, and I'll perhaps just add one more, which is my Hebrew name, Shmuel, Samuel. I had an experience recently where I really met Shmuel, so to speak, as my higher self, as this shaman, if you will, and someone who is here to help the world by connecting to those deeper realms. And so, having that word over there reminds me to keep that front in mind, front and center in my mind. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting and awesome. And I like how, um, I mean, you have it all very well organized, and it all ties into this podcast like perfectly. So it was just low hanging fruit. I had to take a bite. So slightly related, but slightly kind of. I guess I'm interpreting some of the things that you're saying. I really like the idea of that words create and structure our reality, and I would say that one of the realizations that I had, and this has kind of been an ongoing thing, but as I look into our culture, like I live in the United States, particularly the culture of the United States, but I see this in the culture of the West as well, through the pandemic and the hysteria and trauma and just issues of the pandemic. And then I see this, right now, in the unfolding of this, particularly I would say after October 7th, is there's a quote, I forget exactly who says it, but like if you want to if you look at any society that is kind of being destroyed, the first thing that you'll find is the destruction of language. And I have one of the things that I've kind of felt called to, and it's a I'm continually reminding myself of this, but how important the words we use are, to be incredibly intentional about how you say things, um, and incredibly intentional about how you respond to people. There's a lot of I feel like there has been kind of a bastardization of language. I don't know, over the last few years, a lot of words that we thought had a meaning are kind of being changed. Um, I think probably people know what I'm saying when I say that, but like,
Mm.
um, this brings me to kind of a realization and calling that I had, which is like, it is important for us to use our words, and to use our words widely, and to not be silent, and to be as intentional as we can about how we speak with one another. Like the words that we use with one another really matter, really matter. It can be as simple as like, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday where there was some sort of just like minor disagreement, and I said something kind of flippant, and it kind of came off totally wrong, and I was like, wow, like I just wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't thinking about the words that I said, and it made somebody kind of like mad and offended, and like, that's literally just kind of me being, lazy with my words. um this brings me to I don't know if that resonates with you at all, but it brings me to something that we are both very interested in and involved in, which is psychological development. And I'd love, I can help you out with this, but I'd love for you, maybe, because when I speak about psychological development to friends of mine, people are like, oh, I don't know exactly what that is. In the context of kind of, larger psychology, child psychology, psychoanalysis, all these different fields, maybe you can kind of break down what psychological development is, and
Hmm.
how we can think about it as individuals who are on this, spectrum of psychological development. And I don't know how, I also think, like, maybe you could speak to how this relates to mindfulness and awakening.
Hmm. Yeah. So Ken Wilber, the founder of integral theory, talks about different ups, right? Showing up, cleaning up, waking up, growing up. What we're talking about here is growing up, right? And we spoke about waking up, which is that process of uh, having these realizations. Growing up is the process whereby we develop psychologically, right? And as adults, we learn to take increasingly complex perspectives on our experience, all aspects of it, right? Social and psychological and scientific, whatever you want. Um, how we understand reality, and so on. Um, and so the process of growing up is how we catch up to those realizations of waking up, right? Is how we learn to understand that, okay, the truth of the way things are is it all the time, not just when I'm having peak experiences. But you know, you speak of aspects of waking up, of growing up, and perhaps cleaning up, right? Looking at our shadow material and the things we don't want to look at about ourselves. You're speaking to aspects of this that are so important for each and every one of us in our daily lives, right? We are in this process whereby we are learning to step away from our conditioned patterns, right? So if we go back to the Mahamudra path of this elephant brain that is being led by the monkey initially, what you're saying is, when I'm not present, when I'm not mindful, the monkey is leading me,
Yeah.
right, according to my automatic patterns. And it doesn't align with how I want to show up, with how I want to relate with others. And so that's such a big piece of this. And we step away from this when we learn to attune to ourselves, right? When we learn to bring our hearts to our experience and understand that, oh, okay, I was reactive with this person. Before I try to understand what was going on with them and what was going on in the interaction, let me see what's going on with me, right?
Mhm.
Why am I reactive? What part of me is hurt, right? And is trying to protect itself.
Yeah.
And that process of self-compassion and attunement and so on is the way we grow, right? Because we then uh, learn to heal the parts of us that are hurt, and they don't kind of control us anymore, right? We have more options, right? The monkey isn't leading us necessarily anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the zeitgeist, I think maybe just to be a little bit more concrete, I think one of the things, a demonstration, if we were going to like talk about psychological development as kind of a process, like um, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of right now is in American political culture, but also kind of social culture, is tribalism. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
been this renewed kind of tribalism where simply people take sides and
Yeah.
people recognize they see something that they view as opposition to them, and in response to that they look away, they do not acknowledge it, they're unwilling to listen to it, and they,
Mm-hmm.
without even listening, they state that everything on that side of the other, everything that this thing
Mm-hmm.
represents is wrong. I'm not even going to listen to what they
Yeah.
have to say. This is wrong, I am right. There's this
Yeah.
like really intense kind of black and white thinking happening that I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing a lot of in the West. But I'd love to maybe, I don't know, when it comes to and so ultimately the goal is to not be like this. Ultimately
Yeah.
the goal the highest level of psychological development is not to behave like this. I don't think
Right.
if we think about it, we can all recognize that like this is probably not helping us.
Mm-hmm.
This is not actually, is this creating more peace, is this creating more understanding? No, it's actually shutting a lot of things down. And so
Mm-hmm.
if we were to think of psychological development as a scale, um, or a ladder, where we want to be is something, is you're allowed to hold your whatever political social views you have. Obviously everybody has, we are individuals and we have our own convictions, but we should be able to listen to one another and truly
Mm-hmm.
hear what other people have to say, even if it
Mm-hmm.
differs from our own
Mm-hmm.
beliefs, to
Yeah.
provide empathy. I mean, another thing is like there's this, within tribalism there is like a, this well of empathy that we're not really able to fill. When we feel that somebody is, the enemy, we kind of we get cold. We we kind of shut down. We're not able to
Mm-hmm.
see anything from their perspective. We're not even able to really kind of recognize their humanity. They're the enemy. They're the
Mm-hmm.
other.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe when we think of kind of the zeitgeist of psychological development, and this is a very kind of broad question, but like what kind of things do you think about? What interests you in this kind of topic,
Mm.
and also to just relate it to the stuff you're involved in. Kind of what's that when it relates to psychological development? What is top of mind for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for this question. I think the first thing that I'm called to say is that this really dovetails nicely with everything we've been talking about, with this collective kind of development and awakening, this collective awakening and growing up, um, and with the idea that things are constructed, right? Um, and so you speak of the language that is used to essentially make us more reactive, right? To make us more hateful and more oppositional and so on. And that is how,
Mm,
there is a sort of consciousness war that is happening, that is betting that if enough divisive content and so on is spread on social media and so on, that we will step into those lower levels of psychological development. um, in the stages model, which is one of many models of psychological development, the 2.0 stage is where, it's us versus them. And by design, there are forces that are trying to drag us down the developmental ladder, right? Um, and so, what is top of mind for me is the ways in which the lower stages of psychological development are driving conflict in the world,
mm,
and that is one thing. The other thing that is top of mind for me is the evolution of society and culture in the West. And so, um, you know, again, Ken Wilber talks about this green stage, which in stages would be the 4.0, which is the stage of psychological development where we um, recognize the validity of perspectives that reflect a kind of objectivity, so to speak, that is not ours, right? And so we recognize that, oh, okay, somebody in Papua New Guinea has an experience of objectivity that is different from mine, right?
yeah.
And that is valid too. And, if it's been suppressed, we need to elevate that perspective too, and we need to have as much equality of perspectives as possible. And so the 4.0 is getting into a bit of a trap, right? This green meme, this progressive
Mm,
green meme, and it is evolving into something that is rigid and that fails to recognize the complexity of hierarchies that do exist, right? Of things that are better and things that are worse, and where competence matters, and all kinds of things like this. And so what I think is emerging, and there's a few people kind of out there that are reaching into the 4.5 and the 5.0, into the higher stages, that see again how things are constructed and how everything that we experience in our societies, is an expression of a system in which there are no intrinsically bad parts, right? um, and so when we are at those higher levels of development, we are able to take perspectives of different people and we try to see them in the context of the system, right? And we understand that with our words, with the content that we create and share, and with how we talk about things, and in many other ways, the institutions that we create and so on, we can structure our societies, we can create our societies and shape them in ways that support the well-being of everybody without making anybody bad, without dividing ourselves into races and sexual orientations and so on. All of those things are valid and true, but at some point we need to stop kind of the divisiveness and start coming together and seeing ourselves as, again, waves of an ocean, which we are.
Yeah. Just to touch on this a tad bit more, because I just think it's very interesting. How are some kind of more What are some more kind of concrete ways that we can kind of, move from, as you called it, like the green meme, or just lower levels of psychological development to higher perspective taking abilities?
Hmm.
I don't know if you have any ideas on that, but how, like, I just want people to kind of think about how that kind of evolution and how that process might work, whether it be, just simply the language that is being used, or
Hmm.
how can we get people to take perspectives that are essentially more tolerant?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it's a complex process that has a lot going into it. You're essentially asking, how do we grow up, right? How do we develop psychologically um, and learn to take increasingly complex perspectives? One answer that I have is, look at the places where you are reactive. And so this is, more in the bucket of cleaning up, perhaps, right? We're doing a bit of shadow work. And what do I mean by this? Look at where you become reactive and look at where you're judging others, right? And and then ask yourself, how am I like that? Right? How does this live within me? Right? How is this an expression um, of my awareness, of my personality, and how do I condemn some of these things in myself, right? And then that helps you put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? So the other person is not intrinsically bad, and so maybe the other person is confused, right? And maybe, just maybe, you can start seeing value in their perspective as well, and you start seeing that the dialectic process of, that dialogue and opposition and so on has value in it. And then, the objective becomes not how to win against the other person, it's how do I create constructive interactions for
Yeah,
the betterment of everybody, right?
that's I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think a lot of this is kind of fundamentally, you have to see yourself as a part of a larger community. You have to see your
Mm-hmm.
fellow human beings as not enemies or the opposite or the other, but people that you live and share and experience life with. And so I think a lot of the vitriol and tribalism that we see, particularly online, but also in person these days, has a lot to do, it kind of shuts that down. It's me versus you. It's complete individualism. It doesn't recognize that we're connected. But I think as soon as you start to see that, like, part of this is like that we are a part of, we're all, I mean, it sounds very woo, hippie or whatever, but like we're human beings, and like we can hurt each other and we can destroy each other, or we can like live with one another, and we're going to have difficulties and we're going to have differences just as you would have with a friend or a spouse or a significant other or a family member. But the goal is to live in harmony with one another and learn from one another
Mm-hmm.
and create things together. And all, despite these differences, despite where we come from and our all of our differences, there's a lot of room for coexistence.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to see value in your fellow human beings and your neighbors. You can't shut
Yeah.
them out, and because it's very, if you shut people out, it's very easy to hurt them. They don't
Yeah.
like, if the mindset
Exactly.
is you don't matter, fuck you, you're the enemy. I
Yeah.
can the rest of all of that anger kind of pours out. Oh yeah, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, as opposed to like, well, there will be a repercussion of this. If
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
spit out is hatred and vitriol at my neighbors, that's
Yeah.
going to affect me. That's going to affect me, my, like, the way that
Yeah.
I behave and interact with other people. But it's also simply hurting people. If everybody's
Mm-hmm.
hurting everybody all the time,
Yeah.
we're living in a kind of worldview that is deeply hurt and is less
Mm-hmm.
open and is less diplomatic and is less
Mm-hmm.
empathetic and is less
Mm-hmm.
productive.
Yeah.
A lot of this starts with the connectiveness of people.
Mm-hmm.
We're not, you know, and like kind of that versus individualism. Like we're not just like, you know, strangers. Like all of this stuff like interacts with one another, and like we have to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, treat each other as like neighbors and human beings and like people that are essentially mirrors of ourselves. You know, these are just
Yes.
people. These are other people like me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and especially so when we disagree, right?
Of
Um,
course.
you know,
Yeah. Most importantly, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And there's this book by this wonderful Lebanese author Amin Malouf, and his book is called Les Identités Meurtrières in French, and I think in English it's something like either on identity, but or something like that. But what it literally means in English is identities that kill, right?
Oh wow.
And
Oh
and
wow.
so
Interesting.
right, so that I think is medicine for
Mm,
the identity politics that we're experiencing in the West, right?
yeah.
Because he's seen it happen in the Middle
Yeah.
East, right?
Yeah.
How we divide ourselves
Yeah.
and dehumanize ourselves based on each other, right?
Hmm.
Based on these labels that we apply to each other. And so, I'll share with you that a lot of people that are deep in the 4.0 green meme progressive kind of uh, zeitgeist and elevating oppressed um, perspectives and all of it don't have this one figured out at all, right? And so I'll share that I was, before my current training with John, I was in another training with Jack Cornfield and Tara Brach, who are two wonderful teachers of Buddhism, and they're wonderful. But the whole thing, had this focus on dividing us based on characteristics of identity,
Mm,
and kind of creating safety in that way. So uh, we had times um, for us to just hang out with people of our specific racial identity, right? And so I was in the non-white Jewish group, right?
yeah.
And I was like, is this necessary? And to a degree, it was. I mean, it had its advantages, but we were never taught to come back together. And most importantly, there wasn't um, an attention to bringing us together when we disagreed, right?
Mm,
So there were no Trump supporters in this training, for
mhm,
example, right? There weren't people that just thought completely differently about things, right? There was no space for it. And that's where the green meme, the 4.0, the progressivism is. It regresses into 2.0, into us versus them. It becomes intolerant of difference,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we need to be really careful with that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Switching gears a little bit, and also I want to be cognizant of your time. We're on the hour and a half mark. I have a few more questions. Are we good on time now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. One of the other thing, and I'm gonna link your websites in your YouTube channel below, so links will be created. But I was just in preparation for this. I was just doing some reading and enjoying your website a lot in your YouTube channel. One of the things that continues to come up um, is neuroplasticity.
Mm,
This is a topic that I was seeing in your website quite a bit, and you've touched on it with Hope for Dystonia quite a bit. But I think it's just I don't really know a lot about it, frankly. I am a beginner. I've heard, it's very much in the zeitgeist. I hear about it on the Huberman Lab podcast. Everybody's trying to increase their neuroplasticity, but I just think it's fascinating and would like to kind of hear a little bit more about it and why. Less so from a maybe productivity perspective, but from the perspective that kind of in the context that we're discussing, what is neuroplasticity? Why is it important, and how can we kind of increase it in ourselves?
yeah. So first of all, I'll say that neuroplasticity is not always a good thing intrinsically, right? So
Mm,
when it comes to dystonia, it's maladaptive neuroplasticity, right? So
yeah,
you are learning dysfunctional patterns because of negative inputs that you're exposed to, right?
yeah,
So neuroplasticity is neutral. the the question is, what are you going to use it for, right? What are you trying to learn, right?
Great reframe. Yep.
And so one way that I have increased neuroplasticity for myself is working with mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms.
Hmm.
And psychedelics in general have been shown to increase connectivity in our brain, including among areas that normally don't communicate, and so on. And when we are caught in really strong patterns, right, that it seems difficult to escape, right, and it could be patterns of depression or anxiety or addiction or trauma and all these kinds of things, or dystonia, right, neuroplasticity can help us break free from these patterns by creating new possibilities and new connections. And plenty of studies have been done on how psychedelics can help with this exactly. I am familiar with some of the perspectives that exist out there. For me, the ways that really matter when it comes to neuroplasticity, the techniques, the approaches that really work, are trauma informed perspectives, first of all. So understanding that often we cling to a certain way of being ourselves, a certain way of operating, because it feels safe, because it feels like the only possible way of being ourselves, because we've learned that that's the only way that we are going to be accepted, right? And so, first of all, with mindfulness and self-compassion and trauma-informed practices of different kinds, that we can talk about in a different episode, we can signal to our nervous system that it's okay to change, right? That it's okay to let go. That yes, you are loved even if you don't do X, Y, and Z. And yes, you are safe in your environment. And no, you don't have to live, in a state of constant, sympathetic overdrive, for example, or a state of freeze. It's okay to come out of that. That's when the possibilities start kind of emerging. And then you can think about novelty, you can think about repetition, you can think about constantly breaking the predictive algorithm that is your brain, right?
Yeah.
Because your brain just says, okay, yeah, I know how it works. I get up and then I brush my teeth and then I do this and that, and that's who I am, right? Like, so you don't even have to give me all the inputs. I'm just going to, right, predict everything else on autopilot. What you want to do with neuroplasticity is break that predictive algorithm by providing inputs that contradict the usual flow, right? And so with novelty, with all kinds of things, you can make that happen. But it's not going to happen if, like a lot of us, you're walking around in the world extremely tense or, with some sort of trauma, because your nervous system is not going to accept that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And just to be clear, like the way that I have heard about neuroplasticity kind of previously on various kind of, I don't know, health podcasts, is like people are thinking about neuroplasticity as like you are able to learn more, your brain is more active, you're able to absorb more information, you're able to maybe be more creative. And what I'm hearing from you is the things that you describe, neuroplasticity helps open your brain up, period. It helps um uh yeah, I guess take on new perspectives, but it literally probably helps you learn more. It probably helps you connect with yourself more, honestly. But maybe I don't know, like there's obviously no goal to neuroplasticity, but what has in your experience specifically with hope for dystonia and also the psychedelic kind of practices that you've talked about, what is neuroplasticity what is neuroplasticity help doing? Is it just breaking those walls down and kind of opening you up to things that you suppressed, or what is it helping with?
Yeah. So one is breaking free from patterns that are deeply entrenched, right? So when new connections are made, it's like a skier that can go down a different side of the mountain, right? So instead of getting your skis stuck in the usual grooves of the usual slope, right, you can go down a different side of the mountain. And that's a good metaphor for the brain and what
Nice.
neuroplasticity can do. And with certain practices, what you can do is, have a fresh coat of snow, right? So that
Yeah.
there is greater ease in choosing the different side of the mountain rather than getting caught up.
I like that
Um,
analogy. Yeah.
yeah, and so breaking free from patterns, finding wholeness in different ways, right? Because when you break free from the usual patterns, you have an opportunity to explore parts of you that you haven't been in touch with, or you haven't kind of allowed yourself to make certain connections. And so, you know, neuroplasticity is how change happens, how we adapt ourselves to whatever input we're trying to kind of uh, have our brain shape itself around. And so yeah, it's really important to be conscious of how we are engaging in these things, because it's very easy to get into a place of grasping, right? Trying to change ourselves in order to be something that we're not. And we're perpetuating then patterns of self discipline that lack compassion and lack attunement,
Hmm.
that exacerbate our suffering,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Very interesting and well said. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting different side of the conversation, because a lot of the conversation, again, like some of our language and some of the terminology and things that are exciting people online are like a very kind of specific narrative of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I appreciate you just kind of shedding light on a different dimension of neuroplasticity.
Yeah, it's like bring it down from the head and
Yeah.
uh, into the heart. Integrate the feminine into this. It's like it's not all masculine. Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna have the biggest neuroplasticity muscle, right? Like my neuroplasticity is bigger than your neuroplasticity. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
uh, there's a time and place for that, but
Yeah.
also there's more to this,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or mention?
Hmm. Good question. Um, you know, I think if I were to sum up what I hope listeners take from this conversation, is that there is a beautiful and wonderfully rich world within that many of us have been shut out of. And all it takes to begin to reconnect with it is kindness and the readiness to open our hearts to what wants to be felt. And so, my invitation is, ask yourself today, in what ways can I be kind to myself and bring love to what's happening, rather than choosing to rush and run around on autopilot, um, chasing this and that thing. What would it be like to take some time to reconnect with myself in a heart-centered way? And lots of magic can unfold from there.
Amazing.